Hi, I'm Bill Carmody, and I'm the Marketing Whisperer. And today on the program, I have Jay Hummel, who has written a great book called The Essential Advisor. He's also the managing director of InvestNet. Did I say that right, Jay?
You did. You got it
Great.
right.
Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So what's really fascinating to me, Jay, is that there has been a tremendous revolution that's been occurring in the financial advising industry, and I like in your book you specifically talk about this is not an evolution but a revolution, as sort of a lot of changes have happened specifically around things like ETFs and robo advising and technology, and it's really interesting to see sort of where all this is likely to go for the future. So I'd like to sort of start off there and talk about sort of your vision for what the essential advisor is up against these days and how financial advising is changing pretty dramatically.
Yeah, happy to do that. I mean, when you look back over the last 3 to 4 decades, the financial services industry's changed a lot. Well, the delivery of advice has changed a lot, but I think this is a revolution, not an evolution, because this is really the first time that the change is actually being pushed by the end investor. It isn't the financial services firms deciding the change. It's the end investor changing the way they want to do business with a financial advisor or a financial enterprise. They're pushing those firms on technology. They're pushing around the client experience. They're pushing on transparency. Even if you throw out the DOL, the end investor is getting smarter, pushing for transparency, pushing for an understanding of why they're paying for advice and what kind of advice they're getting. And so the idea of the end investor pushing the industry for the first time, we think, is a fascinating issue.
So, how are advisors changing the way that they're engaging with their customers based on those changing needs?
I think the idea of client portals, for example, the ability for the end investor to be a part of their financial life. The world changed after Bernie Madoff, in my opinion, where even high net worth investors who used to say to an advisor, I'm going to give you all my money and I'm going to be completely out of it and I want you to do that for me. I think the end investor of all net worths want to be more engaged, and they want to be a part of it, not only for transparency, but they want to be actively engaged. And I think the idea of just something simple like client portals, where the end investor can get on and see performance and see documents and actually share and even do some of their own self-service, filling out their own paperwork, being a part of this experience, is something that advisors are going to have to deliver in the future.
So, I mean, I think what's really interesting about this is you're right. People want to have more control over their financial outcomes. In fact, that's being forced, right? With the changes in the 401ks, it used to be when my dad was working, he would have a retirement plan so that when he finished working, whether it was 20 years or 40 years, everything would be taken care of him through a pension. And now all of that's being put back on the average investor. So now essentially everybody is responsible for their own retirement. And so there are a lot more at stake if they get this wrong, right?
Oh, a lot more at stake, and not only pensions going away, self-directed 401ks, and the piece that's even more interesting to me is when you look at Social Security, and at 36 years old, our generation might have retirement age literally could be 85, and Social Security for many families isn't going to be enough given healthcare costs and other things to retire on. So all the safety nets that used to be there for end investors not to have to worry about investing themselves in a lot of ways are gone.
So tell me, if there's a lot of people out there, especially sort of the younger generation, that think, you know what, I don't even need a financial advisor. I'm just going to go out there and invest in some ETFs and maybe do some robo advising, basically have something that's just sort of automated advice. Why is that short-sighted? Tell me why the value of the financial advisor is still very much pertinent today.
Yeah, and I think we talk about it in the book a lot, which is this idea of intersection moments in life and going through transitions. And many times end investors don't lean on a financial advisor just for asset allocation or rebalancing a portfolio. They lean on them for advice at a time where they're going through an emotional issue, and the financial issue that they're going through overlaps with an emotional issue. So even young investors, when they think about buying their first house, I was with a Google executive a month ago who was 36 years old. He said he had bet his advisor. His family had hired an advisor. He had the right to work with that advisor. He had said he bet the advisor that he was never going to need his advice. 6 months later, he had to call that advisor because he was in the Bay Area buying a house. He didn't know, should he exercise his options? Should he spend money? Should he get a loan? Should he, in the Bay Area, houses were being bought without contingencies? Was that a smart decision for him? It had very little to do with the financial piece. It had to do with the emotion of he and his spouse trying to make a big decision. And that's where the robo-only advisors or the digital-only solutions just can't step up and meet the needs of that investor.
So, I mean, the thing for me is that when I look at sort of what financial advisors do, you're sort of buying them for two things, right? You're making an initial investment to sort of help them sort of with your strategic plan, and then you're sort of looking at this from a context of helping them execute your plan, right? So to me, one of the things I really liked about your book is you sort of looked at sort of the 5 areas of return on advice, right? And so there's 5 key strategic areas that you like to focus in on, and the first one being financial planning. So do you want to walk through sort of the differences, because I think it's really important when you see there will be impacts of technology in each of these 5 areas, but when you start to think about things like financial planning right out the gate, you're much more likely to be the need of sort of advice and services as opposed to just pure technology. And as you get down to some of the sort of asset allocation and rebalancing, then technology can actually be more of a heavy lifting, right? So there is a balance between technology and human.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the future we lay out is this hybrid model. We believe the human advisor is going to be more relevant 10 years from now than they are today. But the ones that are more relevant are going to be utilizing technology. And you brought up a good point. I believe people get advice. I believe advisors give advice and they implement advice. And so the example I give is an estate planning attorney, right? They sit down and they're going to do estate planning documents for you or a plan, and then they're going to go do the documents. What you really want them doing is you want them actually giving you advice. You don't want them wasting their time actually implementing the things. And financial advisors are going to get there. And so when I look at the running plans used to take a significant amount of time before technology came on. Now there's real-time planning tools. An advisor can run a very sophisticated plan in an hour. So if I'm in a relationship with an advisor and they're going to spend 4 hours on me and my family and a plan, I want them spending 3 hours sitting down with me, understanding me, and 1 hour doing the plan. Whereas it used to be the reverse. It used to take 3 hours to do a plan, and they'd spend 1 hour with me, because my definition of planning is actually almost more coaching. There's obviously the analytics and retirement goals and those types of things. But to me, planning is keeping an end investor focused, getting the emotion out of investing. And if you look from 2007 to 2015, the advisors who were able to keep their end investors invested along a plan significantly outperformed those who didn't. And that's how people are going to end up meeting their investment goals.
So if I were to say, one of the things that you hit on is the return on advice. There are sort of 5 key areas, right? So you've got financial planning, you've got tax management, right? So then you've got the investment vehicle selection, then you've got asset allocation, and then you've got sort of this systematic rebalancing. So if those are the 5 areas that is really the return on the investment that a consumer is making in a financial advisor, I look at this from the perspective of really breaking down technology and versus the human intervention. I would say, sort of let's look at sort of what that looks like for each one of those, because in financial planning, maybe it's 20% technology where you're basically helping to sort of spit out the plan based on sort of that robustness, but the 80% of the sort of time that's being spent, like you said, 3 hours of coaching and understanding what the needs are of your actual customer, and then sort of using technology to help sort of really put a finer point on what those planning metrics are. So that's might be 80-20. Walk me through some of the other ones with tax management and asset allocation. Sort of let's talk about each one of those.
Yeah, so no, I'd be happy to. And one really important point is I think it's different in each category depending on net worth and depending on need, and also depending on where a client is in their life cycle. So let's take tax management, for example. What's not being talked about with digital-only solutions is an end investor goes through 3 stages of their life. They accumulate, right? They work and they accumulate. Then they retire and they decumulate. They spend the money that they've earned and saved, and then they transfer. So if they pass on and they either transfer their estate to charity or to family members. So if I take tax management, for example, in the accumulation stage, you can make the argument that digital-only tools are fine, because a lot of that can be done through investment vehicle selection. But when someone retires and makes rollover decisions about what's the right rollover strategy, should I Roth or should I not Roth? How do I think about how tax management goes with my estate plan? So the human advisor steps in, I think, in the decumulation stage in that tax management area and provides a significant amount of value over the digital only. So in some ways, I think it even just depends on what stage of life the end investor is. And obviously tax management's much more important in estate planning for somebody worth 20 million versus someone worth 5 because of the estate tax exemptions. So I think it's an interesting dialogue even down to the individual investor level.
Sure. Well, and especially when you look at sort of like the technology that's going for the tax side of it, you might be looking at something similar, whether it's 80-20 or 75-25, but like you're still very heavily human driven in the tax side based on whether it's accumulation or decumulation, whether it's basically looking at sort of, are you trying to save taxes now or sort of, and what is your strategy and all those different pieces. So think about the Roth and understanding sort of how you're going to do that. Technology can help sort of provide some guidelines, in those areas. So there is support from technology, but it's really true. It's more the financial advisor driving that phase of the business, right?
Yeah, and I think where advisors provide a lot of value is interpretation. And so even the tax piece, so being able to handle that, and I just think interpretation matters. So you're right. Our thesis is in the tax management area and in the financial planning area, which are the two areas we believe, combined. You'd see the metrics if someone picked up the book. We think in those two areas, a human advisor can provide about 170 basis points of value to an end investor just in those two areas by delivering advice in the right way. When you look at some of the other areas that we looked at, so asset allocation, rebalancing, those are areas you rightfully put on the fact that the technology is going to matter there, and the advisors leveraging technology to be very good in those core areas. Our thesis is all those things still need to be completed for the end investor. Those 5 areas matter, and in the end, the right advisor should be using technology, rebalancing software that didn't exist 5 to 7 years ago that exists today. Asset class selection, maybe in some ways even outsourcing to a third party to help in that area to give scale so that you can actually be spending your time as an advisor in the tax management or the planning area where we don't believe things are as commoditized as they are in some of the other categories.
So your position, and I really like this, is that technology empowers the financial advisor. It doesn't replace him or her, correct?
That's exactly right.
I mean, because to me, we are seeing a technology revolution. We absolutely are seeing sort of how technology is impacting every aspect of finance. And more consumers are being asked to basically take care of their own financial situations, whether it's basically today just making sure that you're saving money, whether you're putting money away for retirement, whether you're ready for, all the curveballs that life is going to share with you. The question then becomes the value of the advisor is to sort of help you as these things happen, both emotionally, right, psychologically, as well as the actual finance itself, correct?
That's right. We think somebody goes through 11 major transitions in their life from the time they graduate from school or they get their first job all the way to when they pass on. And I believe the right advisors of the future are going to look at these 11 transitions. Some could argue with me that there's 8 or there's 15. We think there's 11. We think there's 11 big ones. I think the future of that is that's when advice is needed. And if I was running a practice again, I would be building my value proposition around those transitions because I think that's where people really do need advice. And I think that's where, even I was looking at artificial intelligence articles yesterday, even as AI gets bigger, that emotional component I don't think can be replaced for decades to come.
Well, and the other thing that you really point out in the book that really struck me was this idea of just really understanding lifespan and saying, look, if the average lifespan moves to 110, then you might have an 85-year-old child, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Looking at something like that, to me, is just mind-boggling. It's like you think about things like senior care, and you think about sort of elderly parents, and you think about just living longer and needing to have your money stretch longer. So it just changes the whole focus and the dynamic of what we need to be paying attention to, right?
Yeah, and you saw that part of the book. Rick Edelman, who obviously is a good advisor and an industry thought leader, is really argues that in the future advisors are going to provide 2 really important. That as lifespans get longer, advisors are going to have to be career coaches because careers are going to look different. People are going to have to work longer and retrain themselves. And then 2, your idea of living. So is our families going to go apart like they do today, and then are they going to come back together? Or is a 100-year-old parent going to be living with a 75-year-old child? So having people think about longevity and even living spaces and how communities develop is something that I personally hadn't thought about. I thought his perspective in there was pretty interesting.
I think what I think you've done a great job of doing in this book is really laying out what that sort of essential advisor role is, and I think this is the part where both from if you're a financial advisor, it's great to be able to sort of feel your way through and say, hey, I'm not technology is not necessarily a threat. I mean, it is changing our entire business, and if I don't change with the technology, then yes, I could be put at risk. But if I embrace what the technology offers and really understand how I provide more value, interpreting data, not just sort of providing data, right? And sort of looking at what does this actually mean to you based on knowing you as an individual. These are the places where the essential advisor can play a critical role going forward, and it's what more and more people are going to need, right?
Oh, that's exactly right. I think the world's getting lost in the big discussion of big data. Right? I think there's data, and the digital tools can give you data. They can give you insights, but in the end, I don't think they can give you advice. And my example is someone could tell me I spend $50 a month at Starbucks. Interesting, right? Then they could tell me you spend $50, the average person spends $40, you're spending $10 more a month. Okay, yeah, but what do I go do with that? Advice is stepping in and saying, yeah, you spend $10 more than everybody a month, and if you save that in a retirement plan, this is how it impacts your goals, this is how it impacts your kids' college fund. Let me talk to you about that. So I think we live in a world where there's all this data and insights, but being able to interpret it and put it together, that's where I think the next step of the human advisor, and that to me, that's where advice really matters.
Well, and the other thing I think that you pointed out is passive ETFs are not tax aware. So the idea here is you go out there and you buy sort of these funds, and yeah, they might be extremely efficient from a cost perspective, but the downside risk is if you don't really understand the tax implications, you're not necessarily putting yourself at a sort of tax advantaged position, right? And so continuing to look at sort of even when you are doing ETFs or things of that nature in your portfolio, really having thought through the strategy of what is my tax consequence and what do I want to be investing in today versus what I might be wanting investing in 20 years from now.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's a great example. We believe in things called quantitative portfolios where you can actually get ETF-like structures, but you can own the underlying security. So you can actually do tax loss harvesting and own the underlying security. But I do think, we made a big point in the book. The thing I don't like about the digital revolution is it's focused on investors on cost and not on value. And absent the discussion of understanding value, absent understanding that a human advisor provides very different services in many instances than a digital-only provider, focusing only on cost is like saying you're going to buy a Ferrari for the price of a Yugo and not understand the difference, and everybody understands the difference. So I think as an industry, we need to be speaking more about what end investors get and the value of a relationship with either a financial enterprise or an advisor versus just focused on transparency of cost.
In our last conversation together, when you and I first met, you said the number one biggest mistake most people make on a financial basis is a bad real estate decision. You want to talk about that? Because I love that analogy.
Yeah, I just think when you looked at it, in 2010 and through the market meltdown, we studied a lot of high net worth families, and many of them who got in trouble had made a bad real estate decision because of the carrying cost of that real estate. The real estate market ended upside down. So they ended up taking money out of IRA accounts, out of retirement accounts to deal with the operating costs of a real estate property, and it ended up really melting down some people's investment in their retirement goals. So making big decisions, like I've always said, even if advisors help high net worth families stay away from one bad real estate transaction, they may have actually paid for their fees for the rest of their life.
That's awesome. Jay, is there anything else you want to add? I think we've had a great conversation today. I think you've got some great insights. I love your book. Is there anything else specifically you wanted to talk about today?
Just that whole idea. I think financial advice is important. I think it's needed more than ever. I do think we're at a drastic time in the next 5 to 7 years. And I think advisors really need to look strongly at their practices and strongly at their value proposition. The future is very, very bright for them, but many of them we don't think are moving quickly enough, and we hope they move quickly because end investors need what they do.
Awesome. So Jay Hummel, The Essential Advisor, fantastic book. I think it's a must-read. Anyone who's struggling with understanding how their relationship with their financial advisor will and can evolve over the next couple of years. If you're a financial advisor looking at sort of how do you sort of navigate your way through technology, there's just this book serves many audiences, and I think it's very well written. So thank you for taking the time to talk about us today. I'm really excited about it, and I encourage anyone to pick this up and read it. It's a great book.
Hey, thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.